On today's episode of the CLS Experience, we have a very exclusive treat. He is a human connection specialist, emotional translator, the visionary founder of Create the Love, and the captivating voice behind the Mark Rose podcast, just to name a few. He's a speaker, dynamic writer, motivator, creator, and collaborator. And he offers insights that promise to free your heart and transform your approach to relationships. Big facts. He takes us on a journey to explore the juiciest parts of the human experience, and he doubles down on how to live authentically in the modern world, which I deeply admire. His approach doesn't just scratch the surface, but invites us on a profound journey to understand the essence of what brings us together and sometimes drives us apart. Whether you're navigating the challenges of love, seeking to deepen your connections, or simply curious about the complex dance of human relationships, his insights offer a beacon of light and a path to deeper understanding. He's just a juggernaut in all facets of life and a terrific human and husband. Please welcome the compassionate, vulnerable, curious, and handsome, abundant Mark Rose. How you doing, Mark?
Shit, I could never have a better intro than that, especially read in your radio voice. That's just too good. I feel
Thank
like it was a trailer to a movie. That was so good. I was
It
like,
should
who
be.
is this guy? This is a juggernaut. Okay.
First of all, I received that. I'm so happy I did good by you. You earned it's your story. You wrote it. I just said it with that New York accent. You and I were having an awesome conversation before we hopped on. I've been following your book for a while. Our listeners are in for such a treat today, brother. And I encourage everybody, in case you're not familiar, do a deep dive, play catch up. We'll show you how to get his new book and all that stuff. What I think is most valuable today is we just have an unbelievable conversation. Before we dive in, we're gonna get a little weird. You ready for me?
I love weird.
When you wake up every day, for you personally, brother, what are some non-negotiables for you?
Mm. Workout, breath work, um, and then greet my son and my wife.
Imagine it doesn't get better than that.
It doesn't. Honestly, it's the best when I see him in the morning and he's just like, and he doesn't, I mean, he doesn't say a lot. He squeaks a lot, makes noises, but it's the best.
Yeah. Every day when I wake up, my fiance and I, we do like maybe a 2, 3 minute snuggle session with a puppy. Not the same, but I still look at him as my son. So God willing, I can't wait for the day when I have a real human baby to do that with as well.
Dog's good preparation, man, for sure.
A lot of work.
They really are, but they're so fun. I think dogs are the greatest expression of unconditional love.
Mhm. Agree. Agree. Leave for 5 minutes to come back. I mean, it's like they never saw you, right? I haven't seen you in years.
They're so excited. I love it. I think that's like also, you could make a mistake or something happen with the dog and they don't hold on to the past at all. They're such a good model for us to practice that.
I love how you turn everything into a teachable moment and also a lesson. And it's so true. And, for us, a dog is a big part of our life. But for that dog, we are their whole life, essentially.
Yeah, pack animals are so interesting. Like I remember thinking like we anthropomorphize dogs, like we humanize them in a way. So, if we like kick them off the couch, some people would be like, "Oh, I don't want to hurt his feelings."
Yeah.
But dogs actually just crave leadership. They crave direction. And I think sometimes when we have a hard time asserting boundaries and leading ourselves, we might not be a great pack leader. So I think dogs are so good in all that, in all the elements of that, of like really teaching us, can we be the leader? Can we provide direction? And for a dog, one time means all the time. I think that's pretty true of humans. So if you like let a dog on a couch once, the dog's like, I guess now I'm on the couch. It's like, this is my new life.
So true. Especially the smart dogs, too, almost to a fault.
Yeah.
They remember everything. I agree with you. I love it. A lesson in everything. There's so many places we could take this. I want to dive all in about the new book and so forth, and then a lot of other awesome topics that you talk about. The new book's about to drop at the time we drop this episode. Liberated Love. You co-authored it with Wifey and so forth. I know you're very excited about it. Why this book and why right now?
Well, I feel like the world needs it. the world does, but relationships need it. So many of our relationships are actually contracts that are based on self-abandonment. They're where, it's ironic, but we tend to pursue our dreams when a relationship ends. We tend to step fully into ourselves when our relationships are over. And why do we do that? Like, why not step fully into your potential through the experience of relationship? And if you're single, why not create a relationship from that place that it's actually about both of us coming fully alive? And for us, my wife and I, we lived the experience of, having old patterns in our first relationship. So, for context, for you listening or watching, our first relationship, we dated for 4 years, and then we took a 10-month, we broke up like for good in our thoughts, in our process. It was done and then came back together. We call that relationship 2.0. So the difference between those relationships is staggering. And we really saw as two people who very much nerd out on human relating and connection. It was like, how could two people who have really good skills in this space not be able to work it out? And one, we realized through the ending of that relationship that actually sometimes the most loving thing to do is to end a relationship. And then what was born from the ability to leave and love still be present was a deeper trust in each other that set the foundation for being able to come back. So, the book feels like a very appropriate thing and necessary now, especially when I consider culturally that there seems to be a real inability to be with truth. And to us, like one of the principles of liberated love is dedication to the truth above everything.
That's where we drop the mic. We'll just get warmed up. And I love what you said there. Sometimes the most loving thing we could do is actually end the relationship. I feel as though that's a paradigm shift than what most people would think. And isn't it interesting how oftentimes our desire is greatest right after a breakup, right? Or 6 months before the wedding, you want to get in shape. Why is desire also always most potent right then? What if we can live in that vibration?
Yeah, I remember talking to this when I was a rep. I used to be a sales rep in pharma, and I was present in a room when a patient was told that their cancer was terminal. And that was a wild thing to be present for. I'd never been in a room when that type of information had been shared. And I remember witnessing the guy, witnessing his wife and their response, and really him confronting his mortality. And there's a conversation in uh, the space of oncology and cancer in general of survivorship. Like this idea that when you're told that your life is potentially coming to an end, that you are now then come fully alive, then you do everything you've always wanted. And I think of the work from Bronnie Ware, The Five Regrets of the Dying. It's like the five things, four of them are relational, and it's like, I wish I would have let myself be happier. And it's like, I wish I wouldn't had spent so much time working. And I remember talking to this therapist who's also a monk named Koshin Paley Ellison. He's in New York. And I said to him, what's the difference between someone who is sitting in that room receiving a diagnosis and someone who is not acting upon their life, like waiting for the rock bottom? And he was like, the only difference is the recognition of death. I was like, that's it. That's it. And it's like when I think about why breakups are so potent, it's because it is a death. It's a death of a relationship, it's a death of a future. You have to be with the grief of an ending. And it is, in my opinion, I think breakups are probably one of the most, if not the most potent spaces for the catalyst into being who you are and creating the life you desire. We might, because we don't have a choice, we get to a place where it's no more. No more. Why do we change our body when it's for, oh, like when the wedding's coming up? I think we're tapping into something, much like tapping into death is like that's energy that's always available to you. You could always tap into your death and be like, shit, I better get going. Just like you tap into wanting to be a desirable partner or desirable father or desirable whatever, that the motivation might come through other. It might come from the outside, but it does tap into something for us that I think we all have available to us at all times. And to me, I think where you really start to engage in true change is when you're getting real and honest with who you are and who you want to be. And then, secondly, and maybe the most important, is actually finding something that matters to you more than your bullshit.
I'm laughing because this is so good. And I agree. I think the recognition of death is actually a life hack, right? Because the
Yeah.
very concept and idea that the human experience comes to an end should create that sense of urgency to really live now. And I think you probably know this better than I would. There's a stat somewhere that the people that live the longest or the happiest, they think about death very often. Like
Hmm.
they
I
understand,
didn't know that.
yeah, something along, I forget where it was. I'll look it up and I'll text you after.
It's a
Um,
blue zone. It sounds like a blue zone kind of thing.
Something like that. Like they have like alarm clock that goes off throughout the day or something where they're constantly reminding themselves of the recognition of death.
Mm. What a powerful thing. And so counterculture, you know, like where everyone's spending all their time avoiding presence and avoiding death, doing anything they can. It's like there is a beauty to surrendering to your mortality because it just really you recognize the impermanence of everything. And, I think that liberates us relationally. It's like your relationship can end at any moment. And that could be because someone leaves or you leave or someone passes away. But there is an ending that is inevitable. And I think historically marriage as a construct has really been a prison. Relationships have been a prison. They're saying like, "Oh, you stay here because you made a commitment. You stay here because this is what you're supposed to do." And we're saying, "Fuck that." Like supposed to do. Fuck the you quote unquote made a commitment where we're using shame and guilt. So many of our commitments to other people are void of a commitment to ourselves. And so like if choosing somebody else is not synonymous with choosing yourself, you're not in a relationship. You are in relation to someone, but the relationship itself is not contributing to your well-being. And we're saying like, why not create relationships that are contributing to well-being, that are contributing to growth, that we're actually healing the things that are probably not healed generations up our lineage. And like, what a beautiful thing to know that your lineage has trusted you with this work. I think that's so powerful as a concept of like, wow, my ancestors are like, it's time. And I'm like, shit, I don't want to, but I got to. It's not optional.
It's unbelievable. Straight up. Yes to all this. And it like if a relationship is not enhancing you, and I know I speak from contrast because I was in relationships like that when I wasn't my best self, and
Me
quite frankly,
too.
I was inauthentic. And interestingly enough, when you have the courage to actually be yourself, not only in life, but in relationships, you'll end up attracting the right person to the right version of you. And that's not to say that there won't be friction. Because I'm a big believer in that there's no friction, there could be no light. And when you think of soulmates and so forth, and I'm wondering what your position is on that. But I think that when someone says, "Oh, I'm in a relationship, we never argue, there's never any friction, nothing," I don't even think that's a soulmate. I think it's like a body mate. Friction or a soulmate is supposed to challenge you a little bit, oftentimes maybe into an argument to bring out the best, not only in you, but in the relationship and so forth.
Yeah, I think the idea of one soulmate is just too scarce. Like, then now you have to, if you met your soulmate in grade eight, you're supposed to stay with them forever. Like, it just doesn't make sense. I think soulmates, there's many of them. I think a dog could be a soulmate. I
Sure.
think they're really souls that are about bringing you into deeper resonance with yourself, into more powerful self-expression. So, I think about it, it's like, your soulmate could be the person that teaches you to leave. Your soulmate could be, and that could be because they sucked, So it's not, the soulmate isn't always about um, the soulmate is always about bringing more love through you, more power through you. And I think we often misconstrue the idea of love as being tolerance, and that conflation causes a lot of suffering. But love is actually ferocious in its ultimate expression. And what I mean by that is it's a loving thing to say no to something that's not healthy. It's a loving thing to say, I will not tolerate this. It's loving to say, your behavior's not okay. It's loving to say, I don't like how we handle conflict. I'd really like to learn something different. It's loving to say, I feel like we've grown apart. That's love because that's saying, like, I love you so much and us so much that I'm willing to tell you the truth. I'm willing to hold it with you. And for people who probably spent, I'd say the majority of people spend their childhood in families that don't point to the truth. They build adaptive strategies to not talk about the alcoholic dad or the narcissistic mom or the abusive uncle or the culture that we're in that is in so many ways fucked up that we don't talk about it. But it's like the black sheep of the family doesn't fuck the family up. The black sheep of the family liberates the family. And when we can start to see that causing friction in a relationship, as you're saying, is not evidence of relational dysfunction only. It actually is evidence that two people are trying to work through something and to find some sort of cohesion. It makes sense that two humans with two different experiences, two different wounds, two different lenses of the world, when they come together and try to walk alongside each other, um, there's going to be some there's going to be some challenges. How could there not be?
I love this, brother. I think it's just so much deeper than people might even realize. And it's funny because I'm definitely a recovering people pleaser. And now also because I have that insight about who I really am, is I actually look forward to now having tough conversations, especially as a coach and so forth. I like to push people because in a proactive way where they can elevate to their next level. And it's like now when you have people around you in your circle that will not co-sign your bullshit. Sometimes it's
Mm.
things, but you also love them for it, right? Obviously, the right delivery and so forth. But when someone calls me out on something, or if I needed to hear that, even though it might sting, I appreciate it. That's why I want people like that around me, not yes people per se.
Yeah, like who want? First off, we don't respect people who don't tell us the truth. This is quote unquote the nice guy syndrome, but that's of any doesn't matter your gender. It's like when we are doormats, no one respects doormats. Not to mention that that kindness is not even authentic anyways. It's contrived and it's people pleasing and it's really tried to keep people close. I mean, our book is really about the disintegration of codependency and, at the core of codependency is an experience of self abandonment. But the self abandonment is not to be shamed. Even as I say doormat, there's like probably an experience of someone, kind of shuddering, like, oh, fuck, I've been a doormat. But to actually have compassion that the very behaviors we have relationally are the exact behaviors we needed to have to get to where we are today. So they're the perfect adaptive strategy to survive, but that doesn't mean they're the right strategy to thrive. And so, really, our book, but the conversation we're having is about actually stepping into and creating a space that fosters thriving instead of surviving. That says, hey, like you're people pleasing, your self abandonment, it's actually not okay here. I want you to honor yourself and your needs. How do I create space? Because usually two people in a relationship, one usually takes up more space and the other one uh, is more contracted. So it is actually the work of both people to create a safe space. One has to step back a little bit and advocate, help advocate for the other person to advocate for themselves.
It's good. And I know you guys talk a lot about codependency, not only the book and your content. I think it's so powerful. I wanted to ask you, are most humans codependent? And how common is codependency, specifically in a relationship?
I mean, codependency is rampant. It's everywhere. It makes sense though from an evolutionary perspective. As humans, we're always asking two questions. Am I safe? And that's in every relationship and in all our circumstances. And the second question is, am I safe to be myself? And if the answer to number two is no, we will compromise number two, being ourselves, to keep number one. So that's our lives. Look at social media. Social media, if you say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, you're instantly attacked. So that creates codependency. So our codependency doesn't just live interpersonally. we see it on a meta scale in the way that we dialogue about everything. And we define codependency in the book as any relational dynamic where we source safety from something or someone at the expense of our own needs, our own sense of self, and overall well-being. So it's really like how we create quote unquote perceived safety, because that doesn't mean it's safe, right? Like if you and I are in a relationship and I don't feel safe to actually share who I am because you're really reactive, I'm maintaining safety, but it's at the cost of myself. I don't actually feel safe. I'm constantly on eggshells. So my nervous system is going to be activated all the time. And there's lots of research to show that people in high conflict relationships, even if they're not fighting, are in a state of inflammation. And inflammation, of course, is so correlated to things like autoimmune, gut issues. This is all signs of a dysregulated nervous system. So codependency is everywhere. And the beautiful thing is that we can change how we relate. We could change how our attachment styles. We could change everything. So, now it's like become the artist and be like, okay, what do I actually want to create? There's an author, Eric Fromm, who talks about how he wrote a book called The Art of Loving. And in it, he says there's nothing we fail at more than love, but yet don't take the time to learn. And I always laughed when I read that because it was such a deep truth of like, there's something about being a human and you like all of a sudden are starting to date, let's say when you're, I don't know, 12, 15, whatever it is, it's probably younger now, but you're starting to date and all of a sudden you're just expected to be good at relationships. Even though no one's taught you, the only thing you've learned is from your parents. You probably have a lot of infusion of culture and movies. You also have your religion, which I'm sorry, but most religions in their extremes do not teach healthy relating. They teach self abandonment in order to stay and keep membership in the religion. That doesn't mean there aren't beautiful aspects of it. So, yeah, everything we're taught is don't be you. And if you're you, you're going to probably lose love and connection from your community. Look what happens to people when they get divorced. We actually shun them and shame them, yet they actually said, "Hey, you know what? I'm not going to tolerate this." Not all divorces, obviously, some are not done in a healthy way.
Yeah.
That was a long rant.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you for sharing and pulling back the curtain. And I agree. It's like, first of all, I think if any, there's a codependency. It's on like playing small these days. People are so invested in not thinking bigger and chasing their dreams. But specifically with what you're talking about, how are you supposed to be good at something that you don't necessarily have experience in? If you didn't learn, just like you wanted to be good at anything, you might study it or have a coach,
Right.
right? So I think that's so profound. Even if people are in a good relationship right now, it's good to plan ahead because inevitably there'll be some friction. But maybe you guys can just get on the same page. Okay, when we do have potential arguments or if there is a rift, here's how we'll handle it together.
That's so important. Stan Tatkin, who's a pretty famous psychologist, he runs the Pact Institute. He talks about how the reason that relationships end is because they fail to create agreements. And one of the things you're talking about there is creating agreements about like, how do we manage conflict? Like, because most of us don't even talk about that. It's what happens is we fall back into very familiar conflict patterns. So when you get upset, I withdraw, which makes you more upset, which makes me withdraw and leave the house, shut the phone, close the door, hang up the phone. So everyone has a dance that they do, but we might as well actually create some rules around the dance, some intentions around the dance. So I really love what you're saying because, as you mentioned earlier, good relating is not about avoiding conflict. It's actually about how we manage conflict. And one of the things we talk about in the book is how to do all that, but also the importance of rupture and repair. And one of my favorite quotes from John Gottman is he says, really good couples, like what separates relationship masters from what he calls the disasters, is that when you're hurting, the world stops and I attend to you. We don't leave each other in pain. We don't let each other suffer. And I think that is probably one of the greatest principles I've ever learned to live with is like, as much as I'm kind of that spiteful fighter in that, like, if my wife is upset, I'm like, yeah, let's let her stay upset. Just like experience, that's like what I want to do. But I can't do that. I can't in good conscience of like how beautiful our connection is. To let her suffer is actually not fair because I'm not mature enough to actually bring forward and hold her pain and hear maybe how I'm not showing up properly or well, how I might have let her down. So we like increase our capacity to hold our own shame, our own guilt. And what happens is the relationship becomes this really safe space. And safety is ultimately at the core of what really allows people to cultivate more love.
That was beautiful, brother. Very deep. Can you repeat that quote again?
Yeah, when you're hurting, the world stops and I listen. That's how the quote goes. When you're hurting, the world stops and I listen. We don't leave each other in pain. He talks about how he gets his notebook out when his wife's upset. I'm like, wow, I'm not getting a notebook out, but I like the
So interesting. Oftentimes, for me, probably I would say probably the majority of women, maybe, they just want you to be there and actually put your phone down and just connect with them. They don't necessarily want you to solve anything. They just want you to be there and just hear them out and take some time. And often I speak for myself, but I'm always like solution oriented. This is what we could do. Or this is how to get around it. Sometimes they don't care about that. They just want to know that you're there.
It's so true. It's like we as men go right into fixie mode. I remember my dad told me years ago. I wish he had told me younger though. He told me when I was like 25. He said, when your partner is upset, just ask her, do you want me to listen or help? I was like, why didn't you tell me that when I was like 16? That would have been really helpful. It would have saved me it would have saved my partners a lot of frustration where we're like, let's just solve this right now. I know what the solution is. And they're like, I don't want your solution. I just want to be hugged. Have you ever seen the video on YouTube called It's Not About the Nail?
I don't think so.
Oh, you got to link it out for the listeners, but you got to watch it. And it's a woman with a nail in the middle of her head. And she's trying to express how she feels. She's like, I have this ache in my head and it just hurts. And he's like, well, if you took the nail out of your head, it's really good. You'll have to check it out.
I'll check it out after. It's so good. And I heard a quote actually that was similar, but there was a third option. It said, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard?
Oh, that's good. The three H's.
Yeah.
Helped, hug, or heard. Too late to put that in the book.
But
It's really good though. I love it.
maybe we could just implement it in real life.
Yeah,
But
it's beautiful.
yeah, I'm glad to hear that you can also relate to always just wanting to fix something. Uh,
Yeah, it's innate, for men, our value has historically been placed in the ability to find solutions. So it's not a deficit of men. It's that we just and also we're terrified of letting our partners down. Because with that comes the cascade of fears. Like if I let you down, you'll seek somebody else who won't let you down, right? So there's so much social programming, but also evolutionary reality that I think consciousness sometimes makes us forget that we're biological beings, that we're mammals. And there's an arrogance to consciousness that disconnects us from that the often the reason we choose unavailable people over and over again or stay in familiar patterns or choose chaotic people or tolerate abuse is because of the imprint of the nervous system. So much of the work that we do relationally has to include the nervous system. And in our book, we talk about it because healing without healing the nervous system is not healing.
I imagine it would just be temporary.
Yeah, and also you're not getting to the deeper core of, it's like when someone says, "Look, I've been doing the work and I still got triggered." And I'll always say to people, "Well, the trigger doesn't go anywhere. The trigger is a radar that's basically, if you think of PTSD, someone goes through an experience, let's say, where they're in war and a bomb goes off and their friend dies, and then they're walking down the street and they hear a car backfire. That is an imprint in their system that puts them into an automated threat response. So the exact same thing happens relationally. If, I had a need when I was a kid and I got punished for it, or had a certain emotion, or I saw a certain behavior or way of being that was dangerous, when I'm an adult, I'm going to be hyper vigilant to that, sometimes without me even knowing. And what's going to happen is I'm going to respond in an automated way. So the nervous system, when we start to comprehend how it interacts relationally, and there's, the whole concept of mirror neurons is, I think, really beautiful, but also that when you're starting to build a relationship with a reliable human being, you're doing what's called co-regulating. So your nervous system is having a conversation with another person without you even knowing it. And that's why we can feel incredibly safe with, like, let's say a therapist who's really well regulated, where all of a sudden now we're opening up and sharing stuff. So what's starting to happen though is on a deeper level, our nervous system is starting to learn what it's like to not be in chaos, not be in hypervigilance. So when we start to relate to trusted people, or we become a trusted person too, that can be what we call, and we talk about it in the book, a good trigger. So we're actually triggered by vulnerability. We're actually triggered by availability. And, what I always say to people is, it's not the nervous system cascade is what creates the same outcomes relationally. So if normally I'm hypercritical, or I get defensive, or I stonewall, which means withdrawing, what happens when I get triggered in the future as I build more awareness, right? Like, first is knowledge. They call that psychoeducation. So, like, the first part is knowledge. Why do I do what I do? What am I prone to? What's my partner's wounding? What's their sensitivities? So I start to know more. And then I start to build practices like breath work, meditation, therapy, coaching, right? Like, a relationship with you that a client has is regulating, right? Like, it's they're having an opportunity to pursue things they love, maybe in a way that they never have permission to be themselves. And on a deeper level, you also hold the somatic for you listening means body. You hold the somatic imprint of someone who's liberated themselves. So even the conversation someone's having with you is actually happening on a deeper level, because the way that you live is a lesson. And so I say all this because when we start to cultivate this level of awareness, when the trigger comes up, oh, I'm afraid they're going to leave, or maybe they're upset with me, we actually take a pause, because we've built these new resources. And so the trigger doesn't go anywhere. What we do with the trigger changes. So we often shame the fact that we got triggered, not realizing that the trigger is not a sign of your inadequacy. It's actually a sign of your brilliance. It's what you do with it that needs to change. And I always think that every trigger is an invitation to mastery.
That's unbelievable. That right there. Every trigger is an invitation to mastery.
Yeah. Mastery of a human experience, mastery of relating, mastery of something you needed to learn how to master in order to have confidence around the trigger. So there's an imprint that it led to injury, rejection, abandonment, trauma, right? Those are all real truths. Can I actually go back to that moment and say, what did I need to know then that I didn't? What did I need access to? My no, my this isn't okay. I don't like the way you're speaking to me, like, to my voice. Because what we usually do is we spend our lives pursuing the re-experience of that, so we can actually finally give birth to the wisdom of it. So if I could just, through the guidance, actually go back to the moment and say, what did I need to learn? What I'll start to do is I'll stop pursuing relationships, seeking for them to wound me, so that I can figure out how to step into my fullest potential. And I'll step into my fullest potential. And then how I relate will no longer be from a place of inadequacy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes all the
Yeah.
sense. A couple things that you said that were unbelievable. First of all, a trigger is not necessarily just a negative. And also,
No, that's right.
I think that surprises people, but the way you explained it makes a lot of sense. Um, this is just unbelievable, so thought provoking. To be honest, with you, I'm taking a second to process this stuff. It's really, really good. And also,
Process away.
yeah, and also, like, when you're in that the nervous system stuff, when you're around someone that's very good at what they do, you're disarmed a little bit in a good way, and you're more inclined to lean into that vulnerability. And then also there's other people that kind of make you want to put your shield up, per se, I would imagine.
Yeah, like imagine if grief and sadness was not okay in my house growing up, right? And then as I enter adulthood, I go through a breakup. I don't know how to process grief because no one's ever walked me through that. So what might show up instead is I become depressed or I become anxious. So anxiety is usually because we have the inability or it is not safe to feel one of our core feelings. So that could be because I wasn't allowed joy when I was a kid, or I experienced because sexual excitement is a core experience. It's like maybe I wasn't allowed to do that. Maybe that was shamed. Maybe disgust wasn't allowed, right? So there's all really, it's just important to note that anxiety is not evidence of someone's dysfunction. Again, it's like the canary in the coal mine. So we might become depressed because we don't know how to feel grief, and no one's ever walked us through grief. So when we start to see the value in the feelings we have, the anxiety we have, the grief we have, the breakup, the whatever, we no longer try to save people from them. So, like when someone brings a breakup to me, or let's say someone to you brings, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I have this job I don't love. You're not going to be like, well, just stay in the job because you know what liberation feels like. So, just your presence alone is going to create the safety. And that's likely, I would imagine, why so many people come to you for that type of problem, especially like, how do I reinvent myself? How do I, well, the reinvention formula. Perfect. I actually didn't even plan that. But how do I reinvent myself? Because you have the somatic capacity to hold the unknown. And they might, if they're not going to go back to the family that they learned that uncertainty wasn't okay, they're not going to go back to a friend who's never leaped. Like you don't go to someone who's never done the thing that you want to do because they don't have the actual framework, not just logistically in their brain, like here's the steps you take, but actually like they don't have the coding, the frequency of the transformation. And that's why the lived experience is so much different.
A lot of the stuff that you're talking right now, I feel like a spiritual connection to. And the way you speak, brother, and the stuff that you work on and stuff that you've been through, I imagine spirituality has different definitions. But I have to ask you, I'm just curious, where are you at with your spirituality and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'm always in the woo. I like the woo.
Same,
I wasn't when I was younger, I was very much in the linear logistical mind.
same.
I had a mentor who once said to me when I was trying to understand something that didn't make sense, he said, the mind can't understand what it's created within. And I
Mm,
was like, oh, he's like, this isn't here. This is here.
big
And I was
difference.
like, he's like, it's not going to make sense to your brain because it doesn't make sense because it's the brain is part of the conceptual part of the 3D. And I was like, okay, now that makes sense. Yeah, so for me, I think there's something incredibly profound and liberating about that layers in this, which is that if I can trust the call to have the hard conversation, can I trust the call to leave the job? Can I trust the call to so it's all the same thing, which is we all want to know that if I'm going to have that conversation, it's going to go how I want it to go. But that's actually not the purpose of having the conversation. The purpose of having the conversation is to liberate yourself from your own body, your own mind, and to start to trust who you are. I would say the majority of the time, having a conversation is actually about hearing your own voice because it's actually that is what you need. And that level of like, can I say the thing that I'm afraid to say, which I have no problem doing in my romantic relationship. But I found I was very challenged to do that culturally, or I was challenged to do that on social media. I mean, our nervous system is not designed to have, 10,000 people's opinions, let alone millions and millions and millions of people who have the potential to, to consume something and not like what you say. But I'm starting to see that, the much like in a romantic relationship or a relationship of any kind, the truth doesn't always feel good. And, I had a friend who said to me not long ago that if the truth is to burn the forest that gives birth to all life, then do you hold back the truth? And I thought, oh wow, that's such a great metaphor to recognize that destruction is always what leads to creation. But I think we're so afraid of death, like we were speaking about. But I think even that death of the idea of who am I without the people pleasing? Who am I if I don't source safety from being a doormat? Who am I? What's possible for me? Ah, well, then we're in the abyss because now we realize that everything was possible and we chose not everything. So we have to be with the grief that we didn't choose everything. So there's a paradox you always hold when you step into a new potential, and it's that the potential's always been
As if I couldn't love you anymore.
there.
This is the deep stuff. This is the good stuff, in my opinion. I'm very in the woo now too. I think it's responsible to also marry that with a little bit of practical. But when
Hmm.
I used to hear people say, like, spiritual people, like, you don't have to worry about the how. What are you talking about? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Hardest worker in the room. Not really. When you're really connected and tapped in, and there's a connection there, and you're channeling and you're sharing without an agenda, and you don't need recognition, so forth. Literally, you don't have to worry about the how. Things will open up for you. And it's so cool that you made that reference to it's not much different than initiating a tough conversation as to leave your job and chase your dreams or whatever the case may be. It's essentially you're believing in or have faith in that something will work out.
Yeah, there's a deeper trust. And it's hard because we want to know when we say, hey, stand on the cliff, skydive. But you can't both skydive and stay on the plane. Like you have to you have to choose. And I've skydived once and I wanted to stay on the plane because I thought, why the hell am I jumping out of a perfectly good plane? But that is such a great metaphor for our lives. When I started teaching relationship, I was a pharmaceutical rep. I was there for 14 years. I had golden handcuffs. I had a job that wasn't hard, you know? Yeah, like I know you can relate. And it was like, but I
Totally normal.
can't not. I can't not. And it's just like now I'm deleting Instagram. I'm leaving Instagram. And it's the same feeling. It's like I can't not. I had some guy who was like, because I said, oh, I'm going to you at least YouTube has some relational factor to it. It does pay you for your content on some level, although, you ain't retiring on it, at least not at the views I get. And he said to me, oh, well, it sounds like you're leaving for money. I'm like, bro, if I told any business strategist that I'm deactivating 1.1 million followers, they'd be like, you're fucking crazy. But it doesn't make sense because it can't. It can't. And I know that. It's like I've had a deep calling to make this choice because something is coming. I don't know what it is. Something greater. I'm unlocking something. I'm unlocking a deeper level of trust. But I think about how much energy we put into these experiences that, I mean, I have a lot of opinions on social media, and I know there's a lot of opinions circulating about it, especially lately. But I really believe like you're not meant to be in a relationship with something 24 hours a day that is constantly evaluating you, and not just evaluation through the engagement with your content through people, but actually there's an algorithm that is evaluating you all the time. Is your content worthy of virality? Is it worthy of this? Did you say the right words? Did you use the right music? And the trick of it all is because I don't think you can have a healthy relationship with social media because social media is not meant to have a healthy relationship with you. And the reason is that all relationships between humans are generative. And what I mean by that is they're generative in that you and I are generating something together, but they're relational too. So if you said something or I felt exploited or extracted, like I might with social media, I could say something to you and you would ideally correct your behavior or we would end our relationship. There is no way to actually, it's a one-way conversation. There's no way to engage with social media and share your experience of social media. They don't care. They're not interested in hearing the impact on mental health of kids and people because it means they'd have to change their business strategy, which is to completely extract every moment of everyone's life. And I say that because it's like, could I continue to create on there and grow more business and do whatever? Sure, I could, but I would be not trusting. And I don't think that's the hard part is that when I start to pursue a dream, like you so beautifully walk people through, it's like they want to know that that risk they take is going to lead to the thing. But you don't get the thing till you demonstrate the willingness to take the risk. That thing doesn't show up and the net doesn't appear till you jump. And that is actually, I think, religiously, when people talk about faith, I think that's true faith. Like, can I trust the guidance that doesn't make sense? I think the good sign of guidance is it doesn't make sense. That should be just a way that we see it.
I think this is unbelievable, straight up. First of all, I totally respect everything that you're saying. I kind of knew that, but I never heard it articulated like that. If you think about it, they're literally evaluating you from an algorithm standpoint. Is what you're posting worthy of, going to a certain level? That's kind of messed up.
It's
Uh,
so fucked up. It's very abusive. It's very much like being in a relationship with a narcissist.
Talk about a codependency.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I imagine that's what that creates. But another thing that you said where you landed the plane, I thought was so beautiful and powerful. And that is, I was talking about this on my community call, literally before this call, and I said that do the thing and you'll get the energy to do the thing, not the other way around. It's almost like fortune favors the bold, or if you're spiritual,
Yeah.
the creator will meet you halfway, whatever your thing is. But you have to show the desire, and desire is the word that's often overlooked. But when you activate the desire, then all of a sudden the parachute appears, or whatever the case may be. I think that's so powerful, and I know that it's tough for people listening right now. But you got to have trust. You got to have a faith or a knowing, or just something. Or maybe you're just so unhappy with what you're currently doing that the thought of stepping into the unknown actually feels a little liberating, for lack of better words.
Yeah, I think it's so that how I was saying that it happens in the micro and it happens in the macro, which is that that leaping and that trusting is the same thing as trusting the boundary. It's the same thing as trusting this relationship's not working for me, or I feel afraid to be close to you, or I've run from people who can love me my whole life. How do I start to just stop running? All of these, I think it's Rilke who said, live the questions. Like, live the questions. We're so desiring answers and certainty, but those will appear. I like meet the creator and they'll meet you halfway. It's so true. It's a time old truth. It does, it's, it's been my experience throughout, but even though I know it and I have evidence of that truth, it's still terrifying. And I think it's because the leaps get bigger.
Mm.
You know, it's like the thing you're being asked to do just gets bigger.
I would say this. I don't know how deep you want it to go today, but I want everybody, I encourage everyone to believe in what they believe in. But in regards to the creator and so forth, wants to see your desire. Why should he, stick his neck out for it, for everybody that just says something? But when you take that action, even when you can't see that full staircase, now all of a sudden there's reason to meet you there.
Yeah, there's this great quote. I think it's from Francis Weller, where he says that alchemy doesn't care about the alchemist. Like the very act of creation doesn't give a shit about your feelings. And isn't that so true? Because it's not personal. And I think we actually think that a lot of the things we go through are personal. Like, it's not fair that I was born into this family. It's not fair that da 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 da. I'm not here to negate anyone's experience of a poor childhood, but I am here to say that you can't go back and change it. So if you can't go back and change it, what are you going to do with it? Just like whatever we've been through in our lives, the hardest, and I think sometimes it's very bypassy when someone says, well, just change from it happened to you to it happened for you. Yes, but the complexity that needs to be held is often people think if they move from to you to for you. To you indicates victimization, but there are very real experiences of victimization. So, how do I hold the truth that I was the victim of something, and I'm going to use that something to turn it into a for me? So it's both to me and for me. And then it doesn't have that bypassy sort of experience of it, which I used to say that to people. It happened for you. Check your language. But I'm like, no, even the bridge out of a victim mindset requires the acknowledgement of the victim. It is absolutely appropriate to feel like a martyr when you've been martyred, you know? But to live in martyr consciousness is not powerful. That's where we give away our power due to the circumstances we've experienced. And I think when we start to actually see that we are incredibly powerful, then, as I was saying earlier, we have to simultaneously mourn all the moments we haven't chosen power.
Maybe that ties to something that you often talk about, which I think is pretty cool, which is break up with who you've been.
Yeah, to let go of what was. In our book, we talk about a principle called the sacred pause. And the sacred pause is really this moment, whether you're single, dating, in a relationship, that you actually end what was and to go into creation mode of what you want to create and then bring birth to that. The pause is like the cocoon for the butterfly and the caterpillar, and there is actually a disintegration process. And there's a lot of sadness with disintegration, because even if I was a people pleaser my whole life and all of a sudden I step into my truth, my power, and myself, my needs, my wants, I am going to have to grieve that there's a child who didn't get their needs met, who didn't have a chance to develop a self. But it's actually the power of that grief that leads to the transformation. It sort of is the thing that fuels the fuck yeah, my needs do matter. Like, hell no. I'm not going to be some powerless little kid. I'm an adult. Like, this shit's happening and it's happening now.
Before we land the plane, I wanted to ask you, you also talk about facing uncomfortable truths for personal growth. And I'm just curious if you're feeling frisky and vulnerable, which I know you're the king of vulnerability. Is there a specific uncomfortable truth that you really needed to face? Maybe you prolonged, but once you finally did, really helped elevate you to that next level of your own personal expansion.
Yeah, facing the truth of needing to leave Instagram. That was like a really big one for me because so much of my own brand, my own identity, my own everything. When I first started writing about relationships, I started writing on a website and had a blog that did fairly well. But then when I started writing on Instagram, it took me years to build it up. Um, so it makes me think of like 10 years ago, I really dreamt about having an old Bronco. I love the old pre 77 Broncos. So I bought a classic Bronco. I had it for a while, but I didn't love it. And I remember thinking to myself, like, sometimes the dream you have is not the dream you have. And I, like anybody else, sometimes resist my own transformation because I'm afraid of what it's going to bring. And I think when your success or what you've built is correlated to financial safety, it becomes, and psychological safety. Like it's easy for me to stay in a box and just talk about relationships. Relationships are not really controversial. They're not very triggering generally. You're most of the time going to experience being well liked. But I'm like, I want to talk about so much more than that. Like, it's one part of the human experience, and I think the most potent part for transformation. But like, you could find a rock bottom anywhere. I think there are principles to our lives, like, really core tenets, our relationship to our body, our relationship to what we might call spirit, our relationship to, and when I say body, I mean mental, emotional well health, and then relationships. And these are all really core pillars. Like, we need to clean all of those up. And when we get cleaned up, and really getting, because as soon as you start to come fully alive in the pursuit of your passion, you could then can't still eat like shit. It's just impossible because you're experiencing what nourishment feels like. You then can't go and be malnourished. And so nourishment is really this word that's about everything. It's the content you pour into your fucking head. I remember years ago looking at my phone, reading some news about politics, and could feel this siphon pulling from the middle of my forehead. But, I know that, but I didn't stop it. There was like an appeal to the dopamine centers in my brain. It was doing everything it was supposed to do. And you know, I, I let my chemistry choose for me. I let my brain chemistry make the decision instead of my soul. And that's what I see of this leaving of Instagram is like there's a reclamation of coming back into my body, coming back into my heart, coming back into my soul. I think, and I don't mean this from like a egoic perspective. I mean this just like from what I witness in people. I think there is going to be a mass exodus from technology and a return back to community. And it's because we are not, you could have a million connections on a phone and not have one person to call if you need them. And that just shows you what really matters is the one person. You would trade all a million people for one person, and your body will know the difference than someone who likes some of your shit on Instagram or is your friend on Facebook versus someone you can actually share your deepest truths with and share a love with.
Beautiful, brother. And one of the things that I preach often is there's a huge difference between an audience and a community,
Mm,
right? An audience could be skewed, it could be fake followers, it could be fluff, it could be people that just are into you but don't really care that much. But a community, there's a human connection there. It's very
it really
personal
is.
and it's interactive, and that's something to build upon.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's a like we were talking about with the relationship to Instagram and the constant evaluation that algorithms have. A community is relational. A community is generating something. An audience is usually one way. They're telling you what they think about your work, but they're not interested in a conversation. They're the critic. What is that saying from Brene Brown? Reads that quote. It's like, it's not the critic that counts, it's the man who's in the arena.
Yeah.
And really, the community is the arena. It's us all with our sleeves up, really in the work of being in relationship.
This was so good, brother. Before we land the plane, just real quickly, little fun, maybe rapid fire, 1 or 2 word answers. You ready for me?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. Your favorite movie?
I'm going to say Wedding Crashers.
One of my favorite comedies of all time.
So good.
So good. Great one. Your last meal on Earth would be?
Oh man, steak for sure.
Mm,
Steak with probably some truffle fries. That'd be good.
talk about alignment. That's great. Your favorite guilty pleasure?
Oh man, chocolate. I love chocolate. Actually, even if I was to go beyond chocolate, it'd be gummy bears or like something like that. I just don't eat that shit anymore. But chocolate for sure is like, oh man, I love chocolate.
And just a side note for a second, what you said before is that when you really, I forgot how you worded it, I'll have to run it back myself. So into the conversation, when you're chasing your dreams or you're really on fire for life and you understand what nourishment is, you don't even have the ability to eat like shit. Something like that you said, but it was awesome.
Yeah, you can't anymore because you're too in touch with your body. And it's like being in a poisonous relationship is no different than eating poisonous food.
All right, back to the rapid fire.
No,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
your favorite workout?
Oh, hit. I love a good kettlebell hit training.
Nice. Your favorite book?
That's a tough one.
Real tough.
I'd say my most recent favorite book is Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff.
Okay. I'm gonna look into that myself.
That's a must for understanding what's going on in the world today psychologically.
Okay. And the last one, very, very deep stuff. Your favorite musician?
Right now, it would be O.C. Elliott. They're so good. OCIE Elliott.
Okay.
Little folk music.
Love it. This was unbelievable, straight up. You got so many cool things going on. You know, the book's dropping for our audience and so forth and community. What are you most pumped about right now? Obviously, where's the best place to grab the book? We'll do a little giveaway too. And what else are you most pumped about where people could support and get involved?
Yeah, well, I'm really pumped about diving deeper into my own podcast as I leave Instagram. I'm going to be building a community, so I love that you were mentioning that. The book you can get wherever you get books. The audio book I was saying has a conversation between me and my wife, which is like after each chapter we discuss the chapter. So if you're more of an audiobook kind of person, get that. Um, you can go to createthelove.com/liberated love and you'll get bonuses once you buy the book. You get like a meditation, a workbook, and you can find my YouTube because I will be leaving Instagram. So my YouTube, which is where I'm going to post all the content now. I really think long form conversations are important.
The juicy stuff.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. Thanks
Okay.
for having me, man. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you listening, watching.
Yeah.
I don't take it for granted. Your time is the most important thing. So thank you for trading it.
My pleasure, brother. Hang up in 1 sec. I want to connect with you after. Mark, I
Yeah.
want you to know the definition of authenticity, vulnerability, and wisdom. I can personally guarantee your best is yet to come. Keep on spreading your wings and leaving your mark on this world. So much love and respect for you. Thank you so much for stopping by and dropping these priceless, juicy nuggets today.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm so happy I got to stop by.
That was awesome, brother. I could talk to you all day, straight up.
Thanks so much, man. That was fun. That was a great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
And yeah, it was it was fun to be able to just chat with someone who's like deep in it.